Thank you so much for that kind introduction. For the next topic, we'll be discussing learnings and insight from records requests under Section 704A4 of the FD&C Act in lieu of pre-approval inspections. Again, my name is Cassandra Abellard, and I'm a Consumer Safety Officer from the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, Office of Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Assessment, or OPMA. My colleague Jonathan Swoboda will give the second portion of this presentation, focusing on the 704A4 records request process. As a reminder, please type in your questions in the Q&A box so that we can answer these during the live Q&A following the presentations. So the presentation outline for today is as follows. We will cover the pre-COVID-19 OPMA evaluation of application manufacturing information, and then OPMA quality risk assessment of sites requiring PAIs during travel restrictions due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll cover OPMA's quality risk management in determining site eligibility for records requests under Section 704A4 of the FD&C Act. Then we'll go over the evolution of OPMA's 704A4 process and assessment issues letters, AILs. We'll go through two hypothetical scenarios for triaging a site for a PAI or a 704A4 records request. And then finally, we'll cover the conclusions from the presentation. Learning objectives for today's presentation will be to compare tools utilized by OPMA to mitigate drug product manufacturing risks prior to the COVID-19 pandemic and during COVID-19 related travel restrictions. Discuss OPMA's risk assessment strategy to determine whether facility risks can be mitigated via a 704A4 records request or on-site pre-approval inspection is required, and to identify when an assessment issue letter, AIL, is sent following a 704A4 records request. To address OPMA's quality risk management, I want to go over the traditional quality risk assessment that's performed by OPMA, encompassing the CMC section of drug applications. As previously discussed, OPMA has taken on a holistic manufacturing assessment that is depicted here, which encompasses numerous areas of an application to ensure quality products are available to the public. As an application is received by our office, we perform risk assessments for the process design and implementation specific to that product. Although a single evaluation is performed for these areas, the tools utilized for addressing risk vary. For instance, risks to process design are addressed using information requests, discipline review letters, and/or complete response letters. On the other hand, risks identified for implementation are handled using the facility inspection history, as well as pre- and/or post-approval inspections. However, the implementation tools for risk mitigation require travel. And so to put a little timeline around this, this is where we found ourselves a little over a year ago now. COVID-19 hit and then travel restrictions were put into place, and the agency needed solutions for addressing implementation risks associated with approving applications. So the agency implemented a more widespread use of the 704A4 records request. Note that this process was in place prior to COVID-19. As a side note, when creating this slide, my colleague actually created this slide. He says, I think this is a great depiction of myself a year ago when they announced Maryland should enter quarantine. The only difference is my profile has a much larger nose. I would have to agree with him for myself also. My profile has a much larger nose as well. So let's go back to this slide again. The manufacturing risk assessment, the IRs, the DRLs, and the CRLs could still be performed, and design risk mitigation tools were still available to us. However, our previous options for mitigating implementation risk, i.e. pre- and post-approval inspections, were significantly affected. I would even argue that the first tool was impacted as well, as gathering new facility information, for example, surveillance inspections, was also impacted by travel restrictions. So to address this change, the following tools were used more broadly. Despite travel restrictions, we were permitted to perform mission-critical PAIs and PLIs. Further, we reached out to other regulatory authorities to acquire more information on facilities to aid in mitigating a need for inspection. We then implemented the records requests under 704A4 of the FD&C Act in lieu of PAIs. And most recently, we just added RIEs, remote interactive evaluations, which we won't discuss in detail during this presentation. But I'd like to take a moment to discuss the second and third tools that we've been utilizing prior to launching into the 704A4 record review, which my colleague Jonathan will be diving into later in the presentation. So just a quick overview of mission-critical PAIs during COVID-19. FDA's assessment of whether an inspection is mission-critical considers many factors related to the public health benefit of U.S. patients having access to the product subject to inspection. Factors determining whether a product is mission-critical include, but are not limited to, products having breakthrough therapy designation or regenerative medicine advanced therapy designation, products used to diagnose, treat, or prevent a serious disease or medical condition for which there's no other appropriate substitute. When determining whether to conduct a mission-critical inspection, FDA takes into account concerns about the safety of its investigators, employees at a site or facility, and where applicable, clinical trial participants and other patients at investigator sites. And here is the link for the guidance for industry, the Q&A guidance that's been published. So in a previous slide, we mentioned the use of information from other regulatory agencies. Specifically, another tool used by OPMA is the Mutual Recognition Agreement, or MRA, which was launched prior to COVID-19. The MRA between FDA and EU allows us to rely on information for inspections conducted within each other's borders, and to note that PAI capability determination is underway. However, we can rely on surveillance inspection information in evaluating compliance history of a site. We can also use inspection reports done by capable MRA partners in a third country, in other words, countries other than the U.S. or their own country. The confidentiality agreements that are in place allow FDA and other regulatory authorities to share information. This gave us in OPMA additional resources to mitigate implementation risk through facility information garnered by other regulatory agencies. I'll now turn over the presentation to my colleague, Jonathan Swoboda, who will discuss in further detail the 704A4 records review process. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. As previously mentioned, my name is Jonathan Swoboda, and I am a Senior Pharmaceutical Quality Assessor in the Office of Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Assessment. In continuing this talk from my fantastic colleague, Cassie Abellard, I want to discuss OPMA's implementation of record requests under Section 704A4 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. While I do not want to read this slide, I added it for background as you may hear different terms referencing the use of this amendment. In 2012, FDASIA was signed into law, and in Section 706 of FDASIA, an amendment was made to Section 704 in the FD&C Act as written on this slide. Okay, what does this mean for OPMA? With the current COVID-19 travel restriction, OPMA utilizes this amendment to request records from a firm to determine if that information could be used to mitigate the need for an on-site PAI. Essentially, the record request process is used to evaluate a firm's capability of performing the application-specific responsibilities per current good manufacturing practices. Keep in mind, this process is not suitable for mitigating PAIs in all cases. However, a risk-based approach is used to make this decision. Even after a 704A4 record request, a PAI may be deemed necessary if suitable records are not received to justify the absence of a PAI. Let's dig a little further into this risk assessment process and how it is implemented within OPMA. As a side note, for the sake of this talk, when I reference PAIs, it implies on-site inspections. Also, for simplicity, I may just say 704A4 in place of the longer title of record request under Section 704A4 of the FD&C Act. However, if you have any questions about terminology, please do not hesitate to request clarification during the Q&A session. This is critical with all the alphabet soup the agency uses, and I'm more than happy to clarify so we are all on the same page for a better learning experience. Following OPMA's manufacturing risk assessment, if a PAI is recommended, OPMA works with ORA to see if there is additional information from other regulatory authorities that may alleviate the need for a PAI. If adequate coverage is provided, the facility is recommended for approval in the subject application. However, if adequate coverage is not provided, OPMA and ORA decide whether a 704A4 record request is appropriate based on risk. We will discuss a few scenarios at the end of this presentation demonstrating this risk assessment process. As folks may already know or have experienced, if a 704A4 record request is permitted for a site, ORA and OPMA develop a list of record requests for the firm to respond to in order to address residual concerns we have regarding the implementation of the proposed responsibility. The process typically involves more than one round of requests prior to deciding whether a PAI is needed or not. Now that you have an overview and better understanding of the 704A4 process, we can discuss how this process has evolved over the past year. OPMA's use of 704A4 record requests in lieu of PAIs during COVID-19 travel restrictions began March 2020. The initial requests made by the agency were lengthy, and firms spent a significant amount of time preparing documents for a response. The process also utilized several rounds to reach a final decision, and typically the outcomes of a 704A4 was not known to the firm until after a regulatory action was taken on the application. Firms were notified of remaining issues supporting a withhold decision through a post-application action letter, also referred to as PALs, received approximately 10 days after the complete response letter is sent to the applicant. Sites recommended for approval did not receive any communication indicating the 704A4 process was over. Before moving on to the process used today, I wanted to explain this pictorial is meant to convey decisions and actions regarding 704A4 record requests were taking place at different points in the review cycle for different applications. In some cases, 704 decisions were made early in their review cycle, and their assessments were completed near mid-cycle, while in other cases, these actions may be carried out closer to the UFA date. During the past year, the agency has made significant enhancements to the 704A4 process. For instance, timelines for making a 704A4 record request decision, in other words, 704A4 or PAI, take place early in the review cycle, allowing more time for the record request and assessment portion of the 704A4 process. The requests made by the agency are more focused on product-specific implementation risks. Additionally, the agency has improved communication and transparency on the outcome of 704A4 assessments through the addition of assessment issue letters, also referred to as AILs. Prior to concluding with examples of 704A4 versus PAI decisions, I wanted to elaborate more on the recent AIL process that is applicable to 704A4 record request assessments in lieu of a pre-approval inspection. The agency is working directly with facilities to communicate any issues identified through a review of records or other information requested. Following the conclusion of a 704A4 record request assessment in lieu of a pre-approval inspection or pre-license inspection, the agency issues an assessment issues letter to the firm. Please note, the agency is utilizing AILs for 704s associated with PAIs and PLIs. We are currently looking at expanding this program into other areas. AILs indicate 704A4 review is complete, outlines remaining issues, and provides contact information for responses to such issues, if any. Responses to an AIL letter regarding these issues will, as feasible, be considered before taking an action on a pending application. The agency encourages applicants to be in communication with all their facilities and sites to ensure timely responses to any inquiries to support application assessment. Finally, I want to circle back to risk assessments performed to determine whether a site for a particular application is eligible for a 704A4 record request. This hypothetical scenario involves a proposed tablet manufacturing facility. In evaluating the application, it is noted that the product has low API content for 3 different APIs, and it also has a complex drug release profile. Further, the submission batches had insufficient bulk blend uniformity results. In looking at the site proposed for commercial production, the site's only inspection history involves coverage of manufacturing sterile parenterals using terminal sterilization. Based on the manufacturing risk factors described above, the risks most likely cannot be resolved using a 704A4 request. Therefore, an on-site PAI would be recommended to ensure implementation of commercial manufacturing results in a quality product. This scenario relates to a sterile API manufacturer. During the application risk assessment, design risks identified are sterility relating to patient safety and the unique synthetic route used for manufacturing the API that may result in carcinogenic impurities. In assessing the facility's inspection history, it is noted the firm is compliant and has experience manufacturing sterile APIs. However, during the last surveillance inspection with a VAI outcome, 483 observations were issued related to the laboratory control system that may or may not have safety implication for the subject sterile API. Given these risk factors, a 704A4 is deemed eligible to request records relating to analytical testing of the carcinogenic impurity to verify adequate controls are in place to ensure the manufacturing of a quality product. While the outcome of the 704A4 may result in a request for a PAI, given the firm's previous experience and compliance history, it is considered lower risk, permitting an initial assessment using a 704A4 request. In conclusion, I hope that we have conveyed the following. COVID-19 pandemic has altered the way OPMA performs manufacturing evaluations. Since the pandemic started, OPMA used quality risk management strategies to reduce the need for pre-approval inspections by approximately 55%. Due to the revised quality risk management strategies, the 704A4 process is improving for efficiency, communication, and transparency. The agency maintains rigorous review standards while ensuring the health, safety, and well-being of our investigators, and the agency continues to conduct mission-critical inspections of domestic and foreign manufacturing facilities to help assure compliance with our high standards for quality. Now it's time for challenge questions. So, true or false? Currently, the agency is performing on-site PAIs. Let's give folks some time to provide an answer. The answer is true. As mentioned earlier in the presentation, mission-critical inspections are taking place in addition to on-site inspections in certain locations based on COVID-19 risk. Second question is multiple choice. When are assessment issue letters sent? A, at the start of an on-site PAI, B, in the middle of a 704A4 records request, C, upon receipt of your application, or D, following the conclusion of a 704A4 records request. The answer is D, following the conclusion of a 704A4 records request. As previously discussed, AILs are used to communicate to the firm the 704 assessment is complete. AILs also provide the firm with a list of outstanding issues preventing an approval recommendation for that site if applicable. If time permits, responses to the AIL's outstanding issues may alter the site's withhold recommendation as appropriate. Now for the final challenge question, and this relates to the risk assessment process and the scenarios previously discussed. In this case, a site listed in an original submission has no inspection coverage for the proposed operation. Which assessment option is most appropriate? A, on-site PAI, B, 704A4 records request, C, approval of site without further evaluation, or D, none of the above. The correct answer is A, on-site PAI, as the site has no inspectional coverage. If you think back to slide 13, you can see that this site does not have adequate coverage. In other words, no inspection history. So a 704A4 is not appropriate to mitigate the risk, and a PAI is needed. Additional information on the site from other inspections would be needed for a 704A4 to be considered a possibility. With that, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge all these folks, including additional phenomenal colleagues in OPMA and ORA, not mentioned here, for helping make all of this possible. Finally, we would like to share the following links for additional information. Please note, number 4 is hot off the presses, so we cannot comment on too much. However, additional information will be available soon from the agency. On behalf of my wonderful colleague, Cassie, and myself, thank you for your time and attention. Questions?